Hey you, do you want more wins in 8 games? Are you getting tired of other players' sweatiness? Well, in this series, I'll be giving tips for every power in Ink games. In this first episode, I'll teach y'all how to play Powerless, but considering how every power is just Powerless with extra steps, we'll instead be looking at tips and tricks on the individual games themselves, as well as any differences between having no upgrades and max upgrades. Now to clarify, these tips won't make you win every game, but will improve your odds. Also, I'll be using this avatar when playing with no upgrades, and this avatar when playing with max upgrades. Finally, this video has chapters so you can skip to whatever game you're having trouble on. Now with that out of the way, let's get to the video. Now it would only make sense for us to start with the first game you'll play, that being Red Light Green Light. I'm going to give a basic rundown on each of these games in case you're new to Ink games and don't know how these games work. In Red Light Green Light, you just gotta make it to the other side, only moving when the stoplight at the top of the screen is green. If you move when the light is red, you'll be shot, and even the smallest bit of health you lose can cause you to go into what I like to call the injured state. When you're in the injured state, you'll start limping, and blood will start gushing out of your leg. As one might assume, you can't sprint when you're limping. But don't worry, other people can carry you in the injured state at the speed of an uninjured person. Also, quick little tip, 2 injured people can carry themselves at the same speed as an uninjured person. So you might want to use that if you see another person who's also injured. You also get pocket sand, but I'll get to that in a minute. Now, as for playing Red Light Green Light without upgrades, just kind of, isolate yourself. I know, this is the iconic game in Squid Games where everybody finds out the games are deadly. So you might want to, play aggressive, just be like the guy in the show. But in Ink games, playing aggressive in Red Light Green Light without push or baseball star is just a really bad idea. So instead, just sprint to the other side and stay away from other people, lest you want to end up like this guy. If people are really trying to get you gone, then this is probably when you should use Pocket Sand as some sort of Dale Gribble style self-defense. Also, stand behind either 2 of these buildings or this tree to avoid getting pushed out of the safe area. And don't think you're safe in the far back. Now on to playing with upgrades. Here's where playing aggressive really becomes an option, because now you have both push, which you unlock in Red Light Green Light once you have level 3 strength, and the almighty dash. But in all seriousness though, even with max upgrades, playing overly aggressive is usually a recipe for disaster in Red Light Green Light. Mainly due to how annoying it can be getting close enough to somebody to hit them with push or pocket sand when the light turns red. Speaking of pocket sand, let's address it. Pocket Sand works unlike any other ability in Ink games, since Pocket Sand has 2 states, which I'll deem empty and ready to use. You start in the empty state, and when you use Pocket Sand, you'll grab a handful of sand from the ground. Now you're in the ready to use state, and using it again will deliver the punch and put you back into the empty state. Also, Pocket Sand can be cancelled if you're hit during the animation, which will prevent the state you're in from switching. Now, wrapping up the Red Light Green Light segment, I want to talk about how you'll be turned into free target practice by the guards if you don't make it to the finish line or get pushed out of the safe area when the timer ends. Now, with all that stuff out of the way, let's move on to one of the lesser strategy dependent games, Dalgona. Now, I know you all clicked on this video to see me give you tips about all the games, but with Dalgona, there really isn't any real tips I can give you to improve on most cookies other than take your time and not mess up, or just use the lighter in general. So instead of giving you tips like get good, I'm just going to talk about the cookies themselves, because believe it or not, these cookies are a little bit more interesting than they let on to be. Starting with the basic cookies, from what I would consider easiest to hardest, we have the triangle, circle, star, and the umbrella. Now I call these cookies basic since they are the most common cookies and heal for a decently small amount. Moving on to what I would call the skill check cookies, which there's only 2 of, Sackboy and the Mona Lisa, aka the fractal triangle. Now I call these the skill check cookies because they're rarer, heal you a lot more, and aren't as easy to do with lighter as the basic cookies are. Finishing this short Dalgona segment, I have a tip from a friend who once completed the Mona Lisa with lighter, and that tip is treat it like a normal triangle. Now, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but just stay with me here. The edges of any shape are a slightly bit bigger than what they actually show up to be. Meaning, you can just treat the Mona Lisa's outer edges like a normal triangle since the zigzags are too small to be detected as breaking the cookie. Alright, I know Dalgona was short, and it won't be the only short segment in this whole video, but let's move on to a game where I can actually give you tips on. Lights Out. Unlike Dalgona, Lights Out is a lot more skill based, and in my opinion, the second funnest game in 8 games. Now, Lights Out is pretty simple because you get to pick between either a soda and onigiri or getting kimbap, and then you get a weapon corresponding to what food you picked. And then you get put into a 2-minute free for all. Now, real quick before I get into the tips, I want to mention a few things. Number one, the bathrooms are open during lights out, and while you technically can hide in them because the stalls open up and close after a little bit, being in the bathroom is usually just a bad idea because if you get hit pretty much next to anything in the bathrooms, you take extra damage. And two, this game has jump fatigue. And for those unfamiliar with jump fatigue, it's a mechanic where in some games, the more you jump over a certain period of time, the less height you'll get with each jump. So just stop jumping for a few seconds to reset it. This is only really a problem if you're trying to get on top of the beds, which I'll talk about in a minute. And three, the two tables and the weapons actually have different stats, so I'm going to briefly go over both of them. The table on the left has soda and onigiri, which gives the bottle weapon, which does more damage on the first hit compared to the fork, but deals less damage with every subsequent hit. And the table on the right has kimbap and the fork, which has a faster swing speed and more consistent damage than the bottle. So in summary, pick the ball if you're going to target one person, and the fork if you want to recreate the Purge movies. Now on to the tips. As for playing lights out without powers, you can actually play aggressive here, although it might be tricky to escape if you go on low HP without dash. But overall, I recommend just sitting on top of any of the beds and being cautious if anybody tries to get up to you. Playing with upgrades is a bit more interesting considering how with dash you can get up to these beds and how you can dash out of a failed dash attack. Now, this might be a bit surprising, but I won't go into any combat tips in this segment and instead save them for the normal Squid Games since the combat works almost identical in the two games. And it would be easier for me to talk about them there than here considering how this section is already kind of long enough. Now, before we get on to the next segment, as you might already know, the next game is actually a vote between Tug of War and Hide and Seek. But I'm going to start on Tug of War because that segment is a lot shorter and less complex than Hide and Seek is. So without further ado, let's move on to Tug of War. Just like with Dalgona, there really isn't any tips for Tug of War because of how RNG based it is. But unlike Dalgona, there isn't a whole lot to talk about. So I'm just going to briefly go over the basics and a few things to note. In Tug of War, you get put into teams of 5, and you have to complete skill checks to pull the rope towards your side. Now, some things to note is that if you're struggling to hit the skill checks, you can just wait for the marker to loop and get the skill check on the return trip. The amount of progress you get per skill check is determined by your strength stat, so you're probably going to do worse if you have a lower strength stat. But don't worry, you get a strength boost if you're on an uneven team or if the timer reaches 1 minute. Also, according to a friend of mine who plays on mobile, shout out to you by the way, there is a sound cue whenever the marker passes through the skill check box. And that's Tug of War. Now, I do have to apologize for the people that clicked on this video expecting me to give them a game-changing tip on Tug of War, but honestly, this game is probably the most RNG-based game, since aside from getting better at hitting the skill checks, there isn't really anything you can do to improve your odds aside from improving your strength stat. Now, let's get on to Hide and Seek. Compared to the borderline gambling that is Tug of War, Hide and Seek is a lot more skill-based. Meaning, there's a few tips for me to give you. But first, let's go over the basics. In Hide and Seek, you get split into two teams, Hiders and Seekers. As a Hider, you get a key which can open doors with the corresponding shape, and the ability to dodge. You win by either surviving 4 minutes, or escaping through an exit door, which can spawn randomly in a room and requires all 3 different keys to unlock. As a Seeker, you get a knife and you win by eliminating at least one Hider before the time runs out. Now, playing as a Hider is a bit of a pain without dash, but to be real, it's almost as if the entirety of Ink games revolves around the Q key and what mystical properties it brings you once you reach level 5 movement speed. But I wouldn't be doing a good job if I didn't mention how you can beat the Seekers with dash. You can barricade doors once you've opened them as a Hider, stopping Seekers from getting into the room easily, as opening a barricaded door absolutely eats up the timer. So you should really use it, especially if there's only like 25 seconds left on the clock. You can also try juking Seekers, like I am in the gameplay, and pushing them if they round the corner. But you could also try dodging, but I never do that because I'm bad and I can never get the timing down right. Also, unless you have all 3 keys, I wouldn't advise looking for the exit door since you usually do more harm than good. Now, I would only advise this for people with dash, but you can also try pretending to be a seeker. That's right, and you can just run past some seekers as long as you're at full HP, and since the team vests are so dark, you can easily mix them up from a distance. And considering how some seekers put their knives away when they get a kill, you might have a better shot than what you'd think would happen. This is of course dependent on the seeker mistaking you for one of their own, so again, I wouldn't advise doing this without the get out of jail free key. Compared to hiders, seeking can be a lot less forgiving if you get unlucky. You would not believe the amount of times almost every hider has escaped before the seekers even spawned in. In-game devs, if you're watching this, please make it so the exit doors doesn't spawn if there's less than 8 hiders. Please? No, thank you. Anyway, if you're struggling with seeker, you can try staying in a group since you'll get credit for the kill as long as you damage them before they die or rage quit. As with hider, I also have a really risky strat for seekers if you're desperate. Now, this strategy has only ever been perfected by one man, and that is Luigi. And this strategy is just to sit at spawn and do almost nothing. Yeah, I know. It sounds like I'm trolling, but believe it or not, at some point, most hiders will cross through the spawn area at least once if they're being chased or trying to find somewhere else to hide. This is where you come in since you can easily give chase to anybody who dares go back through the middle. Lastly, doors that have been opened by hiders will have keys sticking out of them, so look for keys if you're trying to tell if a hider has opened a door before. Also, according to a friend of mine, it's easier to hit hiders who are parallel to you rather than in front of you. And that about wraps up the hide and seek segment. Now, these next 2 segments are going to be short, but not without their fair share of tips and tricks. So without further ado, let's move on to jump rope. Jump rope's objective is simple. Like a chicken in an overused joke, you just gotta make it to the other side, all while avoiding the rope and the gap in the bridge. Also, every time you jump on the bridge, you need to do a short QTE where you need to either spam the A or D key to bounce yourself. You can also carry people in this game just like you could in red light, green light. Now, I always see people talk about how jump rope is easy and how you're new if you fail it, but being honest, to an inexperienced player, jump rope can be a bit daunting, especially when taking into consideration how nervous one may get when trying to predict when the rope comes down. And even if you get into a rhythm, the gap in the bridge is sure to throw you off your game. The worst part of it is, if you do fail, somebody in the server is probably going to type "how" in chat, and you'll be forced to play the poor previous games again. So, let's learn a trick to make jump rope as easy as other people say it is. Looking up a little bit at the boy's hands can reveal where the rope currently is and can give you the heads up you need to prepare your jump. And as far as for the gap, well, not to worry because the gap is pretty much there for suspense. You can actually miss the gap, and as long as you're close enough to the other side, you'll grab onto the ledge where you become immune to the rope and you can get back up at any time before the bar drains completely. Finishing up jump rope, you should probably try to wait so nobody is in the way so you don't mess up on the gap jump. Now let's make way for the show's most iconic game, Glass Bridge. Glass Bridge is the last game I would consider mostly RNG based. But unlike Dalgona and Tug of War, Glass Bridge does have some tricks to it. But before we get into those, I still need to talk about the basics, even if everybody watching this video already knows how Glass Bridge works. Just like with jump rope, you need to make it to the other side, but instead of crossing a bridge with a gap, you need to jump on one of 2 glass panels. One of which is tempered, meaning you can stand on it without it breaking almost immediately. You won't know which tile is safe until you jump at it, and at which point, you know it's tempered or not. Now let's talk about Glass Bridge's tricks. First off, I lied. You usually won't know which tile is safe, but sometimes the bad tile will be foggy, so you'll know to jump on the other tile. Also, sometimes you'll get lucky and when you step on a tile, it'll start to break, giving you enough time to jump to the other tile before you fall. Before we wrap up Glass Bridge, there's 2 things to note. 1, you should never stand near the edge since you can get tripped by a trickster and fall off. And 2, after Glass Bridge, you get to vote again. This time, it's between continuing or ending the games. Depending on which one you choose, you'll do Rebellion or Mingle. But I'm not going to talk about Rebellion in this video since I feel it would be more fitting to talk about it in the Sharpshooter episode. But considering how I don't actually have Sharpshooter, I'll need help from somebody who does have Sharpshooter to make that episode. But for now, let's get back on track and talk about Mingle. So you might be confused why the transition also had Final Dinner in it, but I'll get to that in a minute. As for the music, I couldn't think of any better ideas. Now, Mingle is the first game where revives are disabled and where making a team becomes especially helpful. During Mingle, you'll get shown a number which corresponds to how many people need to be in a room together. Fail to find a room or have that exact amount of people in it, and you'll die. Also, you get access to Power Hole, which I'll get to in a second. As for tips, you really won't need any since Mingle is usually really straightforward and hard to lose unless you get targeted or unlucky with the amount of people per room. But I do have one tip for you, and it has to do with Power Hold, which I'm going to explain now. Power Hold is the first of two Q2E attacks you get during the final games. When you use Power Hold, both you and the person you Power Hold will be put into a QTE sequence. The more buttons the user hits correctly, the more damage Power Hold will do. The more buttons the victim hits correctly, the less damage Power Hold will do. Power Hold QTE scale up the strength stat, but you can still kill people even if you don't have any points in strength. Also, you can cancel Power Hold with Push or another Power Hold. Now let's talk about Final Dinner real quick before we get into the next segment. Final Dinner is what I consider a secret game that only happens if everybody fails Mingle. Final Dinner is basically a glorified version of Lights Out in normal Squid Game, and as such I'll talk about its combat in the Squid Game section. But I will say that you should only really attack people who are attacking you or somebody you're teaming with. Also, Final Dinner will only end once the timer reaches 0 and 2 people are alive, or if the former happens, only the 2 people with the most health will survive, and everybody else will die. Now, depending on how many people are left, the next game will either be Sky Squid Game if there's 3 or more people left, or normal Squid Game if there is exactly 2 people left. I'm going to go over Sky Squid Game first since most players will get Sky Squid Game before normal Squid Game. So, let's get to the first of the 2 finale games that I'm going to talk about in this video. Sky Squid Game. Before I talk about Sky Squid Game, I want to quickly note that during both Squid Game variants, you'll be stripped of both your powers and items, with the only exception being, of course, the dash button. Also, you have a much better odds of surviving Sky Squid Game if you're teaming with other people, but the tips I'm going to give y'all will apply to people who aren't teaming. Anyway, during Sky Squid Game, you and the remaining players will be put atop the first of 3 giant pillars with a button and a pole in the middle of each. You also get the fight back weapon, which I'll talk about later. After pressing the button, the timer will start, thus counting kills, and you need to kill at least 1 person per pillar by knocking them off the edge. The pole in the middle can be used as a weapon, but will disappear from your inventory once you leave the pillar you're currently on or throw it. You can also grab onto the ledge of any of the pillars, but this is kind of wonky, so you're kind of lucky if it's happened to you. If you manage to get somebody low enough on HP, they'll be ragdolled temporarily, during which you can pick them up and drop them off the edge. This is known as a lunchbox, by the way. On to the tips. Firstly, never go for the pole first. You will almost always get hit out of it. The only time you should ever go for the pole is if everybody else is preoccupied, mainly with the QTE. Speaking of the QTE, let's talk about Fight Back. As I said in Mingle, there are 2 QTE attacks. Fight Back is the second one. If you double click or hit somebody trying to grab the pole, you'll perform a beatdown, which will put both you and your opponent in the QTE sequence, with the same mechanics as Power Hold. Now, if you're planning to be more passive, try and stay near the middle while not being in the crossfire. A nice clean hit even remotely near the edge can still send you flying off at full HP. Also, for those of you with upgrades, dash can be used here, but it's kind of risky, for the same reason I just mentioned. And that's all tips I have for Sky Squid Game. But before we move on to normal Squid Game, I want to mention how if you're the only person still alive on any given pillar, after the button has been pressed, you'll win automatically. But for now, let's move on to the last game, normal Squid Game. Hello everybody that skipped to this part of the video for combat tips. But anyway, the last game of Ink Games is also the most skill-based out of all of them, and my favorite. To keep the basics short, you put into a 1v1 where you get nothing but your fists and the dash if you have it unlocked. There's also a border to prevent you from running away too far, which will make you take damage rapidly if you stay out too long. The tips in this section are going to be for melee combat in general, since every melee weapon except the knife works the same way. Firstly, always try to bait out a dash attack whenever possible, and dodge it by sidestepping it or using the dash for a quick and easy counter punch. Secondly, keep jumping to make yourself harder to hit, and in the same vein, try to predict your opponent's movement and hit them with a dash attack if they're playing too passive. Also, remember if you have dash, you can dash of a failed dash attack. Thirdly, try to avoid up close massing most of the time, as it can easily go either way and become the sole reason you lose. Lastly, try to time your punch so that you hit your opponent as soon as they get up from the ragdoll. This may be tricky, but you can score some extra hits if you're willing to go for it. And that's all the tips I have for normal Squid Game. Thank you all for watching this video, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Now, as I said in the intro, this is the first part of my how to play each power in Ink Game series, so stick around if you got questions for the other powers. This video also did take me a while to make, and I wish I could have gotten it out sooner. Also, like I mentioned in the glass bridge segment, I'm looking for somebody to be the star of the sharpshooter video, and if I don't find anyone, I'll skip it and talk about rebellion in the weapon smuggler video. Lastly, the next video will be on medic, and hopefully it won't be as long as this video and won't take as long for me to upload. Anyways, this was Tides of Coconut Water, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day and win your next match of Ink Games.